At 8 o'clock in the morning on March 8, 1924, the earth convulses. 3 explosions rip through Castle Gate Mine No. 2 in Carbon County, Utah, each blast more devastating than the last. The force is so violent that it launches a 2-ton mining car across the canyon, nearly a mile from the mine entrance. Telephone poles snap like matchsticks. Steel gates weighing hundreds of pounds tear from their concrete foundations and cartwheel through the dawn air. Inside the mountain, 7,000 feet from daylight, 171 men are working the coal seam when the mountain turns against them. The first explosion extinguishes every lamp. In total darkness, miners scramble for matches to relight their carbide lamps. The flames ignite residual gas. A second explosion tears through the tunnels. 20 minutes later, a third blast collapses the remaining roof supports. Rock and coal, 1,099 tons of it, entomb every single man underground. Not one walks out. The rescue crew leader, attempting to reach survivors through poisoned air thick with carbon monoxide, collapses and dies in the tunnel. The final death count reaches 172. 114 of them are married men. They leave behind 415 widows and orphaned children. The youngest victim is 15 years old. The oldest is 73. It takes 9 days to recover all the bodies. Many are identified only by scraps of clothing. One miner's head is found so far from the entrance that his body must be exhumed and reburied complete. This is not merely an accident. This is the price of coal. But to understand why 172 men die in a mountain in Utah in 1924, we must understand what coal means to America. Coal is not simply fuel. Coal is empire. At the turn of the 20th century, the United States transforms from an agricultural nation into an industrial colossus, and coal powers every revolution. Coal fires the locomotives that stitch together a continent. Coal smelts the steel that rises into skyscrapers. Coal generates the electricity illuminating cities that never sleep. Coal heats homes through brutal winters. By 1920, American coal production exceeds 550 million tons annually. The demand is insatiable. Carbon County, Utah, sits atop one of the richest coal deposits in the American West. The Denver and Rio Grande Western Railroad recognizes this. In 1883, the railroad establishes Castle Gate, a coal camp carved into the canyon, and creates the Utah Fuel Company to extract the black wealth beneath the earth. The company opens Mine No. 1, then Mine No. 2, then Mine No. 3. Each mine is a tunnel into profit. Each tunnel requires bodies. The bodies arrive from across the world. They come from the mountains of Greece, the villages of Italy, the valleys of Wales, the islands of Japan. They cross oceans on promises of wages twice what the railroads pay. The letters sent home speak of abundance, of work everywhere, of America. What the letters do not always say is what the work demands, what it costs, what it takes. By 1920, over 4,000 Greek immigrants alone labor in Carbon County's coal camps. They are joined by Italians, Finns, Scots, English, Welsh, Japanese, Austrians, Mexicans, more than 23 nationalities converging in a landscape of extraction. Castle Gate itself becomes known as the Ellis Island of the West. The town swells with men who speak a dozen languages but understand one truth universally. The mine is dangerous, but the money is necessary. If you are finding this story valuable, consider subscribing. These histories need to be remembered, and your support ensures they are told with the depth and respect they deserve. The coal seam at Castle Gate runs deep. Mine No. 2 extends over 7,000 feet into the mountain, a labyrinth of tunnels and chambers carved through solid rock and coal. Miners work in near-total darkness. Their only light comes from carbide lamps mounted on their caps, small flames fed by calcium carbide and water, producing acetylene gas that burns with a weak, flickering glow. The temperature underground is cold, the air damp. Water drips constantly from the ceiling. The tunnels are narrow. A man works bent over, sometimes on his knees, hacking at the coal face with a pickaxe or drilling holes for explosives. The coal itself is hard. It resists. Each swing of the pick reverberates through arms, shoulders, spine. By the end of a shift, a man's body is a catalogue of aches. But the physical strain is not the greatest danger. The mountain itself exhales poison. Methane gas seeps continuously from coal seams, colorless and odorless. Miners call it fire damp. In concentrations of 5 to 15% mixed with air, methane becomes explosive. A single spark can ignite it. The explosion then lifts coal dust into the air. Coal dust, when suspended and ignited, does not merely burn, it detonates. The dust particles combust almost instantaneously, each particle igniting its neighbor in a cascading chain reaction that transforms a tunnel into a cannon barrel. The blast wave travels faster than a man can run, faster than a man can think. It incinerates everything organic: flesh, wood, clothing. It twists steel rails like wire. It collapses timber supports like straw. And after the fire, the afterdamp, carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, nitrogen, all the gases that remain when oxygen is consumed. Afterdamp is silent. Afterdamp is invisible. A man breathing afterdamp feels dizzy, then weak, then unconscious, then dead. Every miner knows this. Every miner has heard the stories. Every miner has attended the funerals. And still, they descend each morning into darkness. The danger at Castlegate Mine No. 2 is not hypothetical. The danger is documented, predictable, and ignored. Coal dust accumulates everywhere underground. It coats the walls, the floors, the timbers, the equipment. It hangs in the air. Mine safety regulations require operators to dampen coal dust regularly, spraying water to keep particles from becoming airborne. This is not complicated. This is not expensive. This is survival. But on the evening shift of March 7, 1924, the shift before the disaster, the coal dust is not properly dampened. No water is applied to the working areas. The dust remains dry, volatile, waiting. Additionally, methane gas has been accumulating near the roof of one of the chambers 7,000 feet into the mine. Methane, being lighter than air, rises and collects in pockets along the ceiling. Mine regulations require constant ventilation to disperse explosive gases. Ventilation at Castle Gate. Mine No. 2 is inadequate. The gas accumulates. A fire boss, a supervisor responsible for checking gas levels, is aware of the methane pocket. On the morning of March 8th, at approximately 8 o'clock, he enters the chamber to investigate. His carbide lamp goes out. Perhaps the flame is extinguished by a draft. Perhaps the fuel runs low. The reason does not matter. What matters is the darkness. The fire boss cannot see. He cannot work. He reaches into his pocket and withdraws a match. He strikes it. The match flares. The methane ignites. The explosion is instantaneous and catastrophic. Castle Gate is not the first. It is not even close to the first. The pattern of mine explosions in the United States repeats with horrifying regularity. On December 6, 1907, 362 miners die in the Monongah mine disaster in West Virginia, the worst in American history. On May 1, 1900, 200 miners die in the Winter Quarters Mine No. 4, just miles from Castle Gate, making it Utah's worst disaster. On October 22, 1913, 263 miners die in the Dawson Mine in New Mexico. On February 8, 1923, 120 miners die in the second Dawson explosion. The memory of Dawson is fresh in 1924. Miners at Castle Gate know what happened in Dawson. They know what happened at Winter Quarters. They know the names of the dead. Some of them attended the funerals. Some of them have brothers, cousins, friends buried in those cemeteries. Between 1900 and 1924, over 11,000 underground coal miners die in mine disasters in the United States. That number does not include the men crushed by falling rock one at a time, the men run over by mine cars, the men electrocuted, the men who suffocate, the men killed by equipment, by animals, by 1,000 other violations. Disasters, defined as incidents killing 5 or more workers, represent only a fraction of the total death toll. From 1900 to 1946, no fewer than 1,000 miners die every year. 1,000 men, every year. For 46 consecutive years. The mine operators know this. The Utah Fuel Company knows this. The state knows this. The federal government knows this. Everyone knows this. And yet the mines continue operating under the same conditions, with the same inadequate safety measures, with the same disregard for human life. Because coal must flow, because profit must grow. Because the economic calculus determines that the cost of safety exceeds the cost of death. Leave a comment below if your family has a connection to coal mining. These stories belong to all of us, and sharing them keeps the memory alive. The families of Castle Gate live in the shadow of the mine, literally. The town sits in a narrow canyon, the mine entrance carved into the rock face above. Every morning, men walk up the road to the portal. Every evening, wives and children listen for the sound of footsteps returning. They listen for the whistle. The whistle is the language of disaster. One long blast, shift change. Short, repeated blasts, emergency. When the whistle screams on the morning of March 8, 1924, everyone knows. Mothers stop mid-motion. Children freeze. The sound is not the regular shift whistle. The sound is panic. To summoning rescue crews from every mine in the region. Within minutes, people are running toward Castle Gate. From Helper, 2 miles away, workers abandon their posts and sprint up the canyon. The wives follow. They arrive to chaos. Black smoke pours from the mine entrance. The steel gates lie twisted in the dirt. Equipment is scattered across the canyon. Timber beams, sections of rail, a mining car embedded in the opposite hillside. Men are shouting. Someone is organizing rescue crews. The Utah Fuel Company brings in teams equipped with oxygen tanks and Draeger breathing apparatus. They prepare to enter the mine, but the mountain is not finished. Gas fills the tunnels. Carbon monoxide saturates the air. The first rescue worker, the leader of the crew, advances into the smoke. He makes it only a short distance before the poison overcomes him. He collapses. His team drags him out, but it is too late. He dies from carbon monoxide inhalation, the 172nd fatality. The rescue operation becomes a recovery operation. For 9 days, teams work to reach the bodies. The task is gruesome. Many of the men are burned beyond recognition. Some are crushed under tons of collapsed rock. Some are found in positions suggesting they tried to run, to crawl, to escape the fire and gas. Identification is often impossible. Brass identity checks, small numbered tags miners carry in their pockets, are blown away by the blast. Families are allowed to view the remains in some cases, but the condition of the bodies is so disturbing that many wives become hysterical and must be led away from the caskets. The bodies that cannot be identified are buried in unmarked graves in the Castle Gate Cemetery, row after row of graves, each marked only with a simple rebar cross and a date, March 8, 1924. But the destruction does not stop at the mine entrance. The explosion radiates outward, demolishing families, obliterating futures, shattering a community. 114 of the 171 miners killed underground are married. That leaves behind 114 widows. It leaves behind 415 children without fathers. Some families lose multiple members. One miner killed at Castle Gate had two older brothers who died in the winter quarters disaster 24 years earlier. 3 brothers, 3 mine explosions, 1 family erased. The widows face immediate financial catastrophe, and most households depended entirely on the miners' wages. The Utah Fuel Company operated a company store where miners purchased food, clothing, and supplies on credit, deducted directly from their paychecks. Many miners owed money to the company at the time of their deaths. The company also owned the houses where married miners lived, deducting rent from wages. With the wage earner dead, the debt remains. The widows are expected to vacate company housing. They are expected to settle company debts. They have no income, no savings, no husband, no future that resembles the one promised. Utah established the Workmen's Compensation Fund in 1917, 7 years before Castle Gate. The fund provides $5,000 per dependent, paid out at $16 per week for 6 years. $16 a week to raise children, to pay rent, to buy food. It is not enough. It is never enough. The Castle Gate Relief Fund is established to solicit donations from across Utah. Contributions arrive from every county. The fund distributes benefits to dependents for over a decade. Some widows are still receiving assistance in 1936, 12 years after the disaster. But money cannot resurrect the dead. Money cannot fill the space at the dinner table. Money cannot teach a son how to be a man. Money cannot hold a widow through the night when grief becomes unbearable. One woman, a Greek immigrant from Crete, survives her husband's death by only 3 years. In 1927, she succumbs to despair and dies. The obituary does not list a medical cause. It does not need to. The final count is 172 dead. 172 men who woke up on March 8, 1924, expecting to return home. The nationalities of the victims reflect the diversity of the coal camps: 50 Greeks, 25 Italians, 32 English or Scots, 12 Welsh, 4 Japanese, 3 Austrians. They range in age from 15 to 73. The 15-year-old boy is a child. Child labor in the mines is common in 1924. Boys as young as 10 work as trappers, opening and closing ventilation doors in the tunnels. By 15, they are doing adult work in adult danger. The 73-year-old man is ancient by mining standards. Most men do not survive into old age underground. Their bodies break before 50. Crushed spines, ruined lungs, arthritis so severe they cannot grip tools. That this man worked until 73 suggests desperation, a lack of alternatives, an inability to retire. He dies in the same explosion as the boy, both of them obliterated in the same instant by the same corporate negligence. The memorial services are heartbreaking. The Greek Orthodox Church in Price, Utah, cannot hold all the mourners. Services are moved to a public hall. 50 Greek miners are dead, 50 funerals, 50 caskets, 50 families destroyed. The widows, dressed in black, keen the Myrologia, the traditional Greek funeral laments. The sound is unearthly, high-pitched wailing that recounts the life and dreams of the dead. It echoes through the streets of Price. Italian widows wail in their own language. Japanese families mourn in silence. The grief is not monolingual. The grief is not monocultural. The grief is universal, expressed in every tongue, every tradition, every religion represented in Carbon County. The funerals stretch across days. Caskets are carried through the streets in processions that seem endless. At the cemeteries, priests in black robes chant prayers. Gravediggers lower bodies into rocky excavations. The earth swallows the dead. The living return to empty homes. In the immediate aftermath, investigations begin. The Utah State Industrial Commission conducts an inquiry. The Utah Fuel Company cooperates. Mine inspectors examine the wreckage, interview survivors from other shifts, review the mine's safety records. The conclusion is clear. The explosion was caused by the ignition of methane gas, which in turn ignited accumulated coal dust. The coal dust should have been dampened. It was not. The methane should have been ventilated. It was not. The fire boss should not have used a match in a gas-filled chamber. He did. And blame is assigned. The state determines that the Utah Fuel Company failed to maintain adequate safety practices. The company is fined. The fine is a fraction of one day's coal revenue. No executive is charged with a crime. No manager goes to prison. The company expresses sorrow and pledges to improve conditions. The pledges are vague, non-binding, unenforceable. Within months, operations resume at Castlegate Mine No. 2. The bodies are barely cold, and miners are sent back underground into the same tunnels where 171 men died. New workers are hired to replace the dead. Many are immigrants, desperate for wages, unaware of the disaster's details. The company does not advertise the death toll. The operators deflect responsibility. They argue that the fire boss's use of a match was an individual error, not a systemic failure. They argue that mine explosions are an unavoidable risk, an act of God, a tragedy, but not a crime. They do not mention the coal dust left dry. They do not mention the inadequate ventilation. They do not mention the fact that every safety measure ignored was ignored because it reduced short-term profit. The investigations produce reports. The reports produce recommendations. The recommendations produce nothing. The question that haunts Castlegate is the question that haunts every mine disaster. Why does this keep happening? The answer is not complicated. The answer is economic. Coal operators function within a capitalist framework that prioritizes profit over human life. Every dollar spent on safety, on ventilation systems, on water spraying, on adequate timbering, on competent inspectors, is a dollar that does not flow to shareholders. Every regulation imposed on mine operators increases operational costs. Coal companies resist regulation with ferocious lobbying and political pressure. They argue that excessive regulation will make American coal uncompetitive, will destroy jobs, will harm the economy. This argument is persuasive to legislators, many of whom receive campaign contributions from mine owners. The mine operators also control the economic lives of their workers. In company towns like Castlegate, the operator owns the housing, the store, the infrastructure. Miners rent company homes. They buy food at company stores, often receiving pay in scrip. Company currency redeemable only at company establishments. Miners who speak out about safety conditions are labeled troublemakers. They are fired. They are evicted. They are blacklisted, unable to find work at other mines in the region. The system is designed to silence dissent. The union movement attempts to intervene. The United Mine Workers of America organizes strikes in Carbon County in 1903, 1922, and 1933, demanding better wages, safer conditions, and the right to organize. The 1922 strike turns violent. On May 14th, a Greek striker named John Tanis is shot and killed by a deputy sheriff in Helper. The shooter is exonerated. On June 14th, in an exchange of gunfire between strikers and company guards, a deputy is killed. 14 Greeks and 1 Italian are arrested. Some of the trials are still ongoing in March 1924, when the Castlegate explosion occurs. The operators use the strikes to demonize immigrant workers. Newspapers controlled by mine owners and sympathetic to the Ku Klux Klan describe strikers as un-American agitators, dangerous foreigners threatening the social order. The nativist backlash intensifies. 2 weeks before the Castle Gate disaster, the Utah Fuel Company lays off unmarried miners and those without dependents, citing reduced coal orders. But the decision is also strategic. Single men are more likely to join strikes. Married men, burdened with debt to the company store and rent for company housing, are more compliant, more desperate, less likely to risk their jobs. The company retains the workers it can control. Those workers die. Let us know in the comments if you've heard similar stories from your own region. Industrial disasters shaped communities across this nation, and recognizing these patterns honors those who suffered. The legacy of Castle Gate is written in stone, literally. The Castle Gate Cemetery contains rows of unmarked graves, each marked only with a rebar cross and the date of death. A plaque at the entrance lists the names of all 171 miners killed. In 1987, the town of Helper erects the Mine Disaster Memorial in Carbon County. In 1988, the Greek Orthodox community dedicates the Hellenic Historic Monument at Holy Trinity Church in Salt Lake City, listing the names of Greek victims and inviting descendants to visit, to kneel, to remember. In 2005, a headstone is placed for Greek immigrants buried in unmarked graves at Price City Cemetery. These monuments serve a dual purpose. They memorialize the dead. They also indict the living. They force us to confront the fact that these deaths were preventable. They force us to ask uncomfortable questions about the value we place on human life versus the value we place on profit. They challenge the mythology of American progress, reminding us that industrialization was built not just on innovation and hard work, but on exploitation, negligence, and mass death. The Castle Gate disaster contributes to eventual reform. Public outrage over repeated mine tragedies leads to the establishment of the U.S. Bureau of Mines in 1910, though its regulatory power remains limited for decades. Workmen's compensation laws spread across states, providing at least some financial support for families of killed workers. Mine safety technology improves incrementally. Better ventilation systems, electric lamps that reduce ignition risk, dust suppression methods. Unionization, despite fierce resistance, gradually forces operators to accept safer working conditions. Annual mining fatalities decline. By 1946, the death toll drops below 1,000 for the first time in nearly half a century. By the 1970s, federal mine safety regulations carry real enforcement power. But progress is slow. It is grudging. It is purchased with blood. Every safety improvement, every regulation, every protective measure is won only after workers die in sufficient numbers to force change. The operators do not reform out of conscience. They reform because they are compelled. The legacy of Castle Gate is a lesson in the mechanics of power, that corporations will not protect workers unless forced, that government will not regulate industry unless pressured, that change requires not just tragedy, but sustained collective action, demanding accountability. 172 men die on March 8, 1924. Their deaths change nothing immediately, but their deaths add to the weight of evidence, the accumulation of atrocity, the undeniable record that forces a reckoning. Today, the town of Castle Gate no longer exists. The mines closed decades ago. The company houses were dismantled or abandoned. The canyon is quiet, but the cemetery remains. The monuments remain. The names remain. We remember them not because their deaths were unique, but because their deaths were typical. They represent thousands of workers killed in coal mines across America, tens of thousands killed in industrial workplaces, millions of laborers whose bodies were consumed by the machinery of capitalism. They remind us that the lights that illuminate our homes, the steel that frames our cities, the energy that powers our lives, all of it was purchased at a price, and that price was paid by men like these: 50 Greeks, 25 Italians, 32 English and Scots, 12 Welsh, 4 Japanese, 3 Austrians, 172 human beings, 172 names, 172 lives that mattered. They descend into darkness on the morning of March 8th, 1924, and they never return. We owe them memory, we owe them justice, we owe them the promise that we will not forget and that we will not allow it to happen again.